The Harrington estate stood like a fortress on the outskirts of Blackwood, a sprawling mansion of grey stone and ivy, the kind of place that carried whispers of history within its walls. On stormy nights, its windows glowed faintly, casting long shadows over the gardens, and the wind seemed to rattle the gates with secrets it was desperate to reveal. It was inside this house, beneath its chandeliers and in the presence of its priceless art, that Arthur Harrington, the patriarch of the Harrington dynasty, took his final breath. And nothing about his death seemed natural. Arthur Harrington had been a man both admired and despised. To the world, he was a formidable magnate who had built Harrington Industry from nothing, a tycoon who made deals that changed markets. To his family, however, he was a figure of power and fear, a man whose approval was rarely given and whose punishments lingered like scars. When news broke that Arthur had died in his sleep, supposedly of a heart attack, suspicion quickly brewed. There was too much money at stake, too many strained relationships, and far too many motives hidden behind polite smiles. Detective Evelyn Carter was summoned to the mansion the morning after his death. She wasn't the sort to be easily intimidated, but even she felt the oppressive weight of the Harrington home. The corridors smelled faintly of oak and dust, the family portrait seemed to stare, and the air carried the heaviness of unspoken tension. From the moment she arrived, she knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary case. Arthur's 3 children were gathered in the drawing room. Marcus, the eldest son, stood stiffly by the fireplace, his hands clenched behind his back, his expression unreadable. Known for his ruthless ambition, Marcus had long been groomed as his father's successor, but recent disputes about the company's future had driven a wedge between them. Then there was Elizabeth, the middle child, draped in black silk, her eyes sharp as glass. She had always felt overshadowed, and whispers suggested she was desperate for recognition and control of her inheritance. Finally, there was Daniel, the youngest, an artist and dreamer who had distanced himself from the family business, but who, in recent months, had returned, seemingly desperate for money. Each of them had something to gain from Arthur's death. But Evelyn knew that the most obvious answers were rarely the truth. She listened as the family recounted the events of the night before. Arthur had hosted a small dinner with the family, a rare occasion since his health had begun to falter. They describe him as lively, almost unnervingly so, drinking wine, telling stories, laughing with a vigor that seemed unusual for a man his age. By midnight, he had retired to his chambers. At dawn, his valet found him lifeless in bed. The doctor, who had been summoned immediately, attributed it to cardiac arrest. But Evelyn noticed the inconsistencies. A glass of wine left on the bedside table, only half drunk. The fact that Arthur had insisted no staff disturb him that night. And most telling of all, the faint trace of bitterness at the rim of the wineglass, as though something had been slipped into it. Poison. The investigation began in earnest. Evelyn walked through the mansion, piecing together fragments of truth. She questioned the cook, who claimed Arthur's meal had been prepared exactly as requested. Nothing unusual. She spoke to the butler, a man named Graham, who had served the Harrington family for decades with unwavering loyalty. His answers were precise, almost rehearsed, but Evelyn caught the flicker of something in his eyes when she mentioned the wine. As the hours passed, the family began to turn on each other. Marcus accused Elizabeth of orchestrating their father's death, citing her recent push to secure a seat on the company's board. Elizabeth fired back, claiming Marcus had far more to gain as a direct heir to Harrington Industries. Daniel, pale and uneasy, insisted he had no interest in the inheritance, but his mounting debts told another story. Their voices echoed down the halls, every accusation more venomous than the last, until the household seemed to hum with paranoia. Evelyn knew that part of her job was to let them unravel. The guilty often revealed themselves not through direct confession, but through the cracks in their masks. Yet something about their fury struck her as genuine. They despised each other, yes, but beneath the bitterness lay something strangely innocent. The belief that one of them must be guilty. The autopsy confirmed his suspicions. Arthur had been poisoned. The substance was a rare extract, something not easily obtained, slipped into his wine in a dosage small enough to mimic a heart attack. Whoever had killed him was not only careful but also knowledgeable. This wasn't the work of an impulsive heir. This was planned. That night, Evelyn lingered in the library, poring over Arthur's documents. She discovered his will, recently amended, a detail the family had either overlooked or deliberately concealed. In it, Arthur had made provisions not only for his children but also for his staff. Substantial sums were allocated to Graham the butler and to Clara, the young maid who had joined the household only a year ago. That struck Evelyn as unusual. Few patriarchs of Arthur's stature extended such generosity to their staff, unless there was a reason. She began to dig into Clara's background. The maid was quiet, reserved, her hands always trembling slightly when she served tea. No one seemed to know much about her, except that she had been hired after a brief interview, on Graham's recommendation. Evelyn questioned her gently, and Clara insisted she had no connection to Arthur beyond her work. But there was something evasive in her answers, as if she were concealing more than she admitted. The breakthrough came when Evelyn examined the wine cellar. A single bottle was missing from the shelf, replaced with one that seemed identical but bore the faintest smudge of a different label underneath. It had been tampered with. She brought the discovery to Graham, whose face paled for the first time since she had arrived. His composure cracked, if only for a second. Late that evening, Evelyn returned to the servants' quarters. She found Clara sitting alone, her face buried in her hands, whispering words she could barely hear. When confronted with the evidence of the wine bottle, Clara broke down. Through tears, she confessed not to the murder itself, but to knowledge of it. She had seen Graham enter Arthur's chambers that night, carrying a glass of wine. She had followed him quietly, too frightened to intervene, and had heard Arthur's coughing fits behind the closed door. Evelyn confronted Graham the next morning. He tried to deny it, to insist that Clara was lying, but the calm facade he had worn for decades began to crumble. Under pressure, he revealed the truth. He had served Arthur faithfully for over 30 years, enduring humiliation, cruelty, and endless reminders of his place. Arthur had promised him a future, hinted at making him part of the family in some way. But when the will was amended, Graham realized that the inheritance he had long hoped for was little more than scraps. Resentment festered into rage. That night, as Arthur celebrated with his children, Graham decided to act. He poisoned the wine, convinced that the family would destroy themselves fighting over the inheritance, leaving him to quietly collect his share. What he hadn't accounted for was Clara's conscience, or Evelyn's persistence. When the police led Graham away in handcuffs, the Harrington children watched in silence. For once, their anger was not directed at each other, but at the man who had lived among them, silently watching, silently judging. Evelyn couldn't help but notice the irony. Each of them had believed the others capable of murder, but in the end, it had been the one they all trusted most. The case closed, but the Harrington mansion remained steeped in unease. The children inherited their fortunes, though the money seemed to weigh heavily now, a reminder of the father who had ruled their lives and the butler who had ended his. Clara, though innocent of the crime, resigned and disappeared from Blackwood, unwilling to remain in a house that held such shadows. Detective Evelyn Carter left the estate with the rain pouring down on the stone steps, the storm mirroring the chaos she had just unraveled. The Harrington legacy would continue, but forever stained by betrayal, not from within the bloodline, but from the hand that had served them for decades. The truth, Evelyn thought, was that in a house where wealth and power reigned, loyalty was the most fragile currency of all.